Stop planting tomatoes like they're fragile seedlings that need to be babied from day one. That old approach, dig a shallow hole, drop the plant in, water, and hope for the best, is exactly why so many gardens end up with weak stems, slow growth, and disease-prone plants by mid-season. When you plant tomatoes the normal way, you're forcing them to survive instead of setting them up to dominate the soil from the start. The difference between an average tomato plant and one that produces heavily for months isn't genetics alone. It is how you build the root zone on day one. The smartest tomato growers don't plant into soil, but what they do instead is build a system underground. If you've grown tomatoes for a while, you've probably noticed something. Two plants of the same variety, planted a few meters apart, can behave completely differently. One explodes with growth, thick stems, and heavy fruiting. The other limps along, constantly stressed, attracting pests, and producing half the yield. That difference almost always starts below the surface. Instead of just planting into existing soil, the smart trick is to create what I call a living planting pocket. This is not just a hole, but a controlled microenvironment that feeds, protects, and drives aggressive root expansion right from the start. In practical terms, that means you stop thinking of planting as placing a plant, and start thinking of it as engineering the root zone. The real trick is layering biology and protection directly in the planting hole. Here's what actually works consistently across in-ground gardens, raised beds, and even adapted versions for hydroponics. You start by digging deeper than most people are comfortable with, about 25 to 35 centimeters deep and just as wide. That depth matters because tomatoes are one of the few crops that can root along their buried stem, and if you take advantage of that, you multiply the plant's ability to absorb water and nutrients. Alright, so let's talk about something a little unexpected. Turmeric. Yeah, the same stuff you might have in your spice rack. Turns out, it's not just for cooking. In the garden, turmeric can actually help out your soil biology in a pretty unique way. It's got these natural antimicrobial properties, which means it can help keep harmful microbes at bay, while letting the good ones thrive. So, when we're preparing a planting hole, this trick really comes in handy. At the bottom of that hole, you don't just throw in compost randomly. You mix a controlled blend. A reliable ratio that has worked across different soil types is about 3 parts mature compost to 1 part native soil, and then you add a biological enhancer. This is where the turmeric trick comes in. A level teaspoon of finely ground turmeric per planting hole is enough. You don't need more. When you mix that into the compost layer, it acts as a natural antimicrobial buffer. It doesn't sterilize the soil, which would be a mistake, but it selectively suppresses harmful fungal activity while allowing beneficial microbes to thrive. That balance is what most gardeners get wrong. They either do nothing and let pathogens take over, or they overcorrect and kill off the biology that actually feeds the plant. Turmeric isn't magic. It's a controlled biological advantage. Let's be clear about something. Turmeric isn't a miracle cure. If your soil is completely dead or waterlogged, no single ingredient will fix that. What turmeric does, when used properly, is reduce early-stage root stress. That's the phase where most tomato plants either establish dominance or fall behind permanently. In real garden trials, what you see within the first 5 to 7 days is subtle but important. The plants don't just look greener, but they also recover faster from transplant shock. Their stems stay firm instead of drooping, and new growth appears sooner. By the 2nd or 3rd week, the difference becomes obvious. Plants that were given that protected, nutrient-dense start begin to outpace others in height, leaf density, and overall vigor. Now, let's talk a bit about deep planting and root initiation. When you plant seedlings deeper in the soil, you're actually encouraging them to develop stronger, more extensive root systems. Over time, this leads to healthier, more resilient plants that can access water and nutrients more efficiently. It's a simple step, but honestly, it makes a big difference in the long run. Planting deep is not optional if you want serious yields. Here's another mistake that needs to be corrected. Too many growers are still planting tomatoes at the same depth they came in the container. That's wasted potential. When you plant a tomato, you should be burying at least 2/3 of the stem, leaving only the top cluster of leaves above the soil. Every buried node along that stem becomes a root point. In a raised bed, this means you might be planting a 30-centimeter seedling with only 10 centimeters showing above the surface. In open ground, you can go even deeper if your soil drains well. If you're working in a hydroponic system, you can adapt this concept by encouraging longer stem sections to sit within the moist root zone media, allowing more root initiation points before full nutrient flow kicks in. So, the result is a plant that isn't just anchored, it's aggressively feeding from multiple levels of the soil profile. The 7-day shift tells you if you did it right. There's a point, usually about a week after planting, where you can tell if your setup worked. Plants that were installed into a properly built planting pocket don't stall. Instead of sitting in place, they push new growth quickly. Leaves stay upright during the day instead of wilting under mild heat. The color deepens, not from excess nitrogen, but from balanced uptake. Alright, so now let's talk about management and precision. This is where your attention to detail really pays off, making sure each plant gets exactly what it needs, when it needs it, for the best possible results. If your plant still looks stressed after 7 days, something is off. Either the soil is too compact, the watering is inconsistent, or the biology in the hole wasn't strong enough. This is where experience really matters. You start reading the plant, not just following steps. Watering and spacing need to match the new root power. Once you start planting tomatoes this way, you have to adjust how you manage them above ground. A plant with an expanded root system doesn't need frequent shallow watering. In fact, doing that will weaken it. Instead, you water deeply but less often, forcing the roots to explore downward where you built that nutrient-rich zone. In a typical backyard setup, that might mean watering thoroughly every 3 to 4 days instead of lightly every day, depending on your climate and soil type. Spacing also becomes more important. When roots are stronger, the plant above grows more aggressively. Crowding them will limit airflow and increase disease pressure, which kind of defeats the purpose of the whole method. This method works differently depending on where you grow. In heavy clay soils, the turmeric-enhanced compost layer acts as a buffer zone, preventing root rot by improving structure and microbial balance right where it matters. In sandy soils, it becomes a nutrient anchor, holding moisture and fertility long enough for the plant to establish before nutrients leach away. The biggest mistake is thinking more is better. One last thing that needs to be said clearly. Adding more turmeric does not improve results. Doubling or tripling the amount can actually suppress too much microbial activity and slow things down. The same goes for compost. If it's not fully matured, you're introducing instability into the root zone, which can create heat and stress the plant. Precision matters more than volume here. Small, controlled inputs consistently outperform heavy, careless additions. This is how you turn average plants into high performers. When you combine deep planting, a structured compost soil blend, and a small but strategic addition like turmeric, you're not just helping the plant. You're removing the early limitations that hold it back. That's why this method works across different systems. It's not a gimmick. It's aligning the biology, structure, and planting technique so the plant can do what it's already designed to do: grow fast and produce heavily. Once you see the difference side by side, it's very hard to go back to the old way. And if you're serious about growing better food, not just more food, this is the level of control you want in your garden. If this kind of practical, experience-driven approach is what you're looking for, subscribe to Gardening Simplified and share this with someone who's still planting tomatoes the old way. The more growers understand what's actually happening below the surface, the better everyone's harvest gets.